Hey, I'm superphiz. It is May 13th, 2023. I'm here with Ben Edgington, who I haven't seen in months.
It's been a while, sir.
Yeah. Um, I've always enjoyed chatting with Ben, and we've meant to kind of catch up personally, but uh, I just I it just hasn't happened. I will confess that sometimes I have anxiety about hopping onto a call, catching up with someone. I don't know why, but sometimes it's like it just causes anxiety. But this is a great opportunity.
This is my terrifying English accent, I'm sure.
Well, it's funny. Like I love you. Like I enjoy chatting with you, but then
Have you
it's
noticed? Have you noticed that all the baddies in Hollywood movies have British accents? Have you? Have you? This
of
is a trope,
course,
right?
yeah. So anyway, we are uh May 11th. There was a turbulence issue on the beacon chain. May 12th, there was a turbulence issue on the beacon chain, and um, I know that right now you're not in the center of it, and obviously I'm just a spectator. But what I do hope that we can do is really just talk about some vocabulary, not necessarily like what do we think happened, even though if we get there, that's great.
Mm,
But really just talking about words like the inactivity leakage
mm.
and finality and just getting like some of that big vocabulary. And you're extremely well positioned to do this. And I can think of at least two reasons why. Um, you are the product owner of Teku, and even if I think you're not active at this moment, but that is still something you have years of experience doing. And you're not active with it right now because you're doing something even more important, right?
Yeah, just for this little while, I'm focusing on writing this upgrading Ethereum book, the ETH2 book. So I'm spending about 130% of my time working on that at the moment, which, but I'm still very much keeping in touch with all things in Teku land and all things on crypto Twitter and all the craziness. So yeah, I've been monitoring the fun and games for the last couple of days and just trying to understand what's going on and yeah, discussing with the guys in the team how to fix. So we got a Teku release out. I should say they got a Teku release out this morning my time, so early on Saturday GMT, and it's not really a fix. It's an optimization to be able to better handle these kind of periods of turbulence in the future. So definitely upgrade your Tekus, upgrade your Prisms as well, because Prism's got a release out.
And I like that you said these are optimizations because I think that there is a clarification that's beneficial. Some people are suggesting that because some people, let's name them. Sorry. Chase Wright said that Teku and Prism are cutting releases, therefore that suggests that they are culpable for the turbulence. And I think that there may be a different way of looking at that, but I'm not sure. They're optimizations, right? So it's not correcting a fix, it is optimizing for attestation handling.
Yeah, so I think let's take things in a sort of logical order. So why don't we start with what happened, and we can talk a little bit about why, and then we can go on to the kind of terminology and the sort of what do people need to understand about the bigger picture of Ethereum and how it works and the design philosophy of that. So that's the finalization and all of that. So we had these two periods of non-finality, so Thursday evening and Friday evening my time, and the first was very short, about 3 epochs, so about 20 minutes, and the second was longer, 8 or 9 epochs, so about an hour. And what that looked like was basically 60% or so of the validators on the network just vanishing. So if you look at the beacon chain explorer, every epoch, so that's every 6 minutes, every validator is supposed to make a vote as to what its view of the chain is. We call this an attestation, and 60% of the votes were just not showing up. So it's as if 60% of the validators went offline. Normally, we see participation rates 99% plus, so 99.5. So to go from 99% down to like 40% is kind of scary. And this means we need, in order to finalize the chain, which is this nice property that proof of stake Ethereum has, we need 2/3, 66% of validators showing up. So we lost this property called finality. Did the chain stop? No, it didn't. Blocks were still produced. Blocks were missing because validators were offline. But those that were online were still producing blocks. Transactions were being processed. Ethereum was running. It was not unsafe in anything but a technical sense. We have this kind of consensus language of safety, but it was no less safe than proof of work was. And as a user of Ethereum, you will not have noticed any funny business at all. But those of us who work at the kind of protocol level and the stakers, it was panic stations. So that's
that leads me to kind of an interesting question, and this is a sensitive question for Ethereans, and is the question of liveness. I saw one stretch of 7 slots that went empty. So that's 84 seconds when there was no block proposal. Does that mean that Ethereum lost liveness? Or is there some other way to explain that's really makes more credible sense?
That used to happen all the time under proof of work, right? I mean, we average like 14 seconds per block under proof of work, but it was stochastic. You could have 1 or 2 seconds between blocks, or you could go for a full minute or 2 minutes between blocks. So, in that sense, it was no worse. We have the luxury now of having this clock tick of 12 seconds, and your transaction will go through. So, in that sense, I mean, so liveness has a sort of technical definition, which you can paraphrase as something good will eventually happen. In the sense, so if you launch a transaction, the good thing you want to happen is it gets included on chain, and it got included on chain, gas price notwithstanding. So that's something good happened, and it happened within a few minutes. So we can argue about nuance about did the chain go down, did it not? I mean, it gets a bit pointless after a while, but functionally Ethereum was working. Degraded performance, but it did not stop.
I want to ask what I know is a pedantic question to kind of illustrate that, but was any intervention required in order to get the chain running again, or did the chain recover itself? And I think the reasoning for that is clear. Like, if we had to do something, then it would have been a halted chain. But if it recovered itself, then it maintained liveness. Is that fair?
Yeah, this is perhaps the weirdest thing about the whole scenario, is that the chain just recovered itself, right? And I'm not sure that any of us fully understand why, and I'm sort of hesitant to admit that, but because we like to be all-knowing devs, but it's still under analysis exactly what the root cause of the issues was, and why the chain recovered. And it recovered fairly dramatically. I mean, the drop off was fast, and the coming back online was fast. There are some theories about this, but we can get into that. But I mean, we should go into a little bit about what happened. I mean, why did 60% plus of the validators vanish? Primarily, I know that Prism and Teku struggled, and we've both got patch releases to address this in future. That accounts, Prism's share and Teku's share together probably accounts the majority of that. I don't know about Nimbus and Lodestar, how they handled it. Lighthouse sailed through reasonably well, as I understand it. So win for client diversity. On this occasion, they carried the network. If
I can pipe up, I'm running Lodestar validators, and they did not miss. So shout out to Lodestar.
Nice.
That's my
cool.
Anecdotal experience, but I did observe my Lodestar validators did great. So I was very proud of that.
Yeah, really good to know. And so what was happening was fundamentally, I mean, there's a lot of complexity here, but sort of simply put, we have these attestations I mentioned earlier, so these votes that float around the network, and they're supposed to be timely. They're received by clients in a timely fashion, validated, included in blocks. They inform the fork choice, and you move on. Over those periods of turbulence, a lot of very old attestations were floating around the network. And by very old, I mean like 10 to 10 to 12 minutes old. So still potentially valid. They expire after about 13 minutes, 2 epochs, but nowhere near current. Now, in order to validate an attestation, you need to know the state of the beacon chain at the point where the attestation was made. So, if it was made for slot 100, you need to know what the state was at slot 100, even if you're at slot 120 now. And states are big. States are hundreds of megabytes. Well, 100 megabytes big. I can't remember the exact number, but it certainly tens to hundreds of megabytes. So clients can't keep many of these around in memory. You can't just keep the last 100 states. It would blow up your memory completely. So clients have different strategies for caching states. But ultimately, at some point, you've got to recompute that state. And this was what was happening. So we were getting an old attestation, and we were having to deal with it. We had to go back in time, load up an old state from disk, run forward, replaying blocks on top of that old state to because we only store blocks periodically on disk. Otherwise, you've got this kind of archive node. But we don't states. We only store states periodically on disk because they're too big. So anyway, you have these block replays, and you might have to replay 10, 20, 30 blocks in order to regenerate that state to validate this old attestation. And then and while you're doing that, another one comes in. So you start up another thread, which validates that. And your whole machine starts slowing down, and you just can't keep up anymore. And you go into this kind of death spiral. And, my Teku was trying to simultaneously rebuild, 10 to 15 states at a time on my 6 CPUs. And, it was taking like 20, 30, 40 seconds for each one. And it basically just ground to halt. It blew up the memory usage, trying to keep all this in memory. And was garbage collecting like crazy, and basically just gave up the ghost. Just could not keep up with that. So, and my understanding is that Prism was similar. Lighthouse survived because they rate limit their the reprocessing of old states. So they will only do, I think, 2 at once, which in this instance save them. In other instances might actually lead to other problems. So, kudos to Lighthouse for surviving this one, but other instances can occur where that's actually the wrong strategy. So it was really interesting. And the question is why?
Yeah, as a validator, like if I'm submitting an attestation that's essentially late, like I still have this expectation that the network is going to process it and reward me for it, even if it's late. And we're sort of saying now that the baggage to do that may be too heavy for the value of rewarding that. Is that fair?
Yeah. So the challenge is to work out which of those attestations are valuable and which are not valuable. So previously, Prism and Teku were basically trying to process everything. So once it's over 32 slots old, you can basically discard it without any consequences because it's worthless then, and it's not giving you any useful information. But newer than that, you've got to decide, is this valuable and worth spending resources on, or shall we discard it? And what the patches to Prism and Teku do is add some kind of heuristic around this. And you have to be careful because an old attestation might actually be really useful for finalization. It might be the attestation you need to finalize the chain. And so you only want to throw away ones which are not useful for finality. And so I think Prism and Teku have adopted slightly different approaches to this, but that's the kind of gist of what we're now doing. So we're no longer trying to process absolutely everything.
It sounds like, and I want to understand the correct narrative necessarily without spinning, but it sounds like Teku and Prism in this case were following the spec and doing their best to award credit where credit was due, but the expense of that ended up being slightly too expensive for their nodes to process.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and we're looking at revisiting the spec to try to explicitly give permission to clients to optimize in this way. So we're probably technically off spec now, but in practical terms, that is unlikely to be important.
That's interesting. Technically off spec, because we do generally pride the beacon chain on being spec driven and not implementation driven. But I believe in this case you're suggesting that we're currently implementation driven to keep the chain going. Is that right?
Well, there's a huge amount of engineering work, right? I mean, so the spec, one of the really interesting things about being on a client team is that when I started this, I thought 90% of the work was implementing the spec and just writing that in code, and then you were done. Turns out to be like 5% of the work. Optimizing, networking, data storage, threading, all this, log management, database nonsense. All of this is just immense amount of work and involves a lot of trade-offs and thinking about caching things and all of that, and prioritizing things. Do I deal with this now, or do I postpone it till later? Is there something more important I need to deal with now? So client implementers are making these implementation decisions constantly. So yeah, and I think there are edge cases and kind of rough edges where the spec is ambiguous or unclear, and clients make different decisions on this, and this is okay, actually. I mean, the diversity in the fork choice stuff is actually can be an advantage. So as we've seen around these edge cases, it can actually strengthen things if clients take slightly different approaches, because some will be able to carry the network where others fail.
Yeah, very interesting. I have two ideas of where I'd like to carry this, and I wanted to find out from you which is more interesting to you. Would it be the value of client diversity or discussing the inactivity leak? Which is more interesting to you right now?
Let's do the inactivity leak first, and we can close off. You can do the client diversity.
It's so funny. I've talked to you about inactivity penalties like 6 times, and so even though I understand them, the name, I need like a list of these are the different inactivity penalties, because I call Validators offline for a day. I colloquially call that leakage, and you're going to say that's not leakage.
Yeah, and we're hopeless at naming stuff, and it is complicated, and people use colloquial, talk colloquial, and people kind of understand it, but at some point it becomes unhelpful. I try to be fairly precise and about how I speak of things, and I try to use the language the spec uses, just because that's a sort of a lodestar, guiding light, a Schelling point, I should say. So what we talk about is, so in the normal course of operation, you've got rewards and penalties. Penalties if you are not carrying out your duties, rewards if you are carrying out your duties. I don't talk, if you get a bunch of penalties, I don't call it leakage. That's just a bunch of penalties, right? You got a day's worth of penalties because you didn't show up in a test, or I'm
going to update my own vocabulary to begin referring to that as an offline penalty. Is that accurate?
Yep. I think
I have
that's
called it
clear.
leakage, and I'm not right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, leakage is okay, except that we have something else that has come to be known as the leak,
that's
right?
Also leakage. Yeah.
Right. So,
and that's people also call slashing, like, oh, it was offline for a day, I was slashed, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that's right. So that I try to be very clear on. So slashing is something completely different, which we might get to. But so what is the leak? We call it the inactivity leak. It was originally known as the quadratic leak. This is a kind of emergency state that the beacon chain will enter, the consensus layer will enter when it's not finalizing. So lack of finality, as we talked about earlier, is a sign that validators are not showing up to do their duty, or they're split on their view of the chain. So only half of the votes are valid in view of one half of the chain, and half on the other. So it's not finalizing. So what happens is that the reward and penalty regime changes during the leak. So after the chain is not finalized for 4 epochs, so normally we finalize after 2 epochs. So if it doesn't finalize after 4, then we enter this leak mode, this emergency mode. and different
and that's a
penalties.
formal mode. Like it is,
Yep.
like the entire network enters inactivity leakage, and
Correct.
you
So
can
yeah.
document that when it happens.
Yep. Correct. So it's a global thing. It doesn't apply to individual validators, it applies to the whole network. So two things happen in that mode. First of all, everybody's attestation penalties, everybody's attestation rewards are 0. So if you perform perfectly during that period, you get 0 reward. Okay. And there's a reason for that, which we can come to, but that's one aspect. And the other one is that offline validators start incurring what we call the leak, which is an increasing level of reward of penalty. So you have your normal penalties that you haven't attested, so those continue. People who attest don't get any reward. People who miss attesting, they get their normal penalty, and in addition get the leak penalty. And the leak penalty grows over time. So every epoch that passes that you didn't attest, it gets larger and larger and larger. So it's kind of grows quadratically. I mean, it's not exactly quadratic, but hence the old name, the quadratic leak. And so what does this do? What this is designed to do is to reduce the balance of validators that are not showing up. So they're not doing their jobs. And if it goes on for a day, 2 days, 3 days, the understanding is this is probably not going to get fixed. So, after 2-3 days, it probably means the network has partitioned in two. So all the validators in China have been, cut off from the rest of the world. The rest of the world is never going to see those validators again. So it drains them out of the protocol. And conversely, all the validators in China can't see the rest of the world, so it drains those out of its protocol. And eventually, what happens is that the non-showing up validators have such a small share of the stake that the ones that are showing up have the magic 2/3 and can finalize their side of the chain, and it regains finality. So the reason this is there is really for the longer term, in that if there's a chain split which lasts for more than about 3 weeks, then the chains are deemed to be permanently separated, and each can go about its business and regain finality. And that 2 to 3 weeks is deemed long enough for people to change client, or to client software patches to be released, or AWS to fix whatever networking issue it's got, or whatever. So
the world split is AWS and everyone else. That's 50-50.
Exactly. And we it's called in the sort of the literature the World War III scenario. The idea that if there were a global conflict, that the network would end up partitioned as nation states kind of cut themselves off from each other, and you'd end up with 2 beacon chains or multiple beacon chains in each territory running independently. So what we saw was nowhere near that. I mean, so yesterday this thing we saw was 9 epochs. The impact was trivial. It was I did a back of the envelope calculation and worked out it was like 28 ETH was leaked out across all of the 500,000 validators, right? So it's completely trivial. It was just a kind of foretaste. If it had gone on for 2-3 weeks, then serious amounts of ETH would have been leaked out. People would have seen their balances decrease by 10-15 ETH over that time.
I know that I'm terrible, but by the time we were like the 9th epoch, I'm like, let's see how far this can go. Like, let's see what's going to happen.
We've done it on testnets. I mean, we've turned off half the validators on testnets and seen that after a couple of weeks it regains finality, and the mechanism works.
I have a clarifying question, and I know that you answered this, but it's still fuzzy in my head. If I am a perfectly attesting, proposing validator during this inactivity leak, I maintain the same balance. I'm not additionally penalized. I just don't get rewards.
Correct.
So in this case, the reward is not being severely punished as the people who are going offline. Because my original thought was, maybe that's a great time to go offline and upgrade my hardware. But no, it is the most important time to stay online to hold your balance.
Correct. Yeah, and if you go offline, you get this leak penalty, which will grow over time. So it's a bad time to go offline. And so what it's designed. So something we did in the Altair upgrade is we changed the dynamic of this. All validators that didn't show up used to receive an equal penalty, no matter how much they were managing to stay online. In the Altair release, we individualized it. So every single validator has its own score, which is its kind of offline score. So the higher the score, the worse you are as a validator. And normally your score is 0. And when we enter a leak period, your score starts accumulating if you miss attestations. And it goes up. I mean, every attestation you miss, you get 4 added to your score. And every attestation you make, you get 16 taken away from your score. So the net result is that if you are making 80% of your attestations, then your leak punishment is basically 0. It doesn't get bigger over time. It's bounded near 0. It's not actually 0. But if you're making less than 80% of your attestations, your score will go up over time, more or less slowly. If you're making none of your attestations, it will go up fairly rapidly. But once you start attesting again, it will drop quickly. And
is there a maximum to that, or does it just continue to?
No, it just keeps going up, dude. So, and your penalty in any epoch, your leak amount that's taken away from you, that's burned from your balance, is proportional to the score. So your score in the first epoch is 4, so you lose a certain amount. In the next epoch is 8, so you lose twice as much in that. Then in the next it's 12, and you lose 3 times as much in that, and it goes up quadratically.
So the incentive there is to do anything you can to get an attestation in, like to
correct,
be online.
Yeah. So it's highly motivational to act and get the chain healthy again. Is the goal of this. And also, the idea is that short periods without finality are not that serious. If it's a few hours or a day, we don't want to punish everybody heavily, so we start the leak off slowly. But long periods, a week, 2 weeks, are very bad, and so we want the penalty to be the leak to be strong, so that people are those not showing up rapidly have their balances drop. And so this is a way of sort of achieving that goal.
I'm really happy to learn that, because I try to share as much accurate information as I can when these things happen, and it's good for me to know, like, hey, home validators, I know you're struggling. Try to get every attestation you can in, if you want to avoid this penalty, rather than, many of us would just say, I give up, like I can't keep up. But there's benefit in trying to get every attestation in. So.
Yep. And you'll still get rewarded for blocks produced and for sync committees. I mean, sync committee participation will be pretty poor at these times. But
are people still getting sync committee?
Few and far between. So yeah, that's a leak. And then slashing, a few people popped up on Twitter and saying, does this mean people are going to get slashed and so on? That's something completely different, unrelated. You actually have to purposely break the protocol rules, or inadvertently break, but the clients will protect you against this. You have to have set up your keys in 2 different places to get slashed. It won't happen as a result of this in protocol turbulence like this. And slashing is where you are kicked out of the protocol for having demonstrably broken the rules, and a large chunk of your ETH is taken away.
So I have a follow-on question to that, and I won't ask you to speak for Prism, but just the general idea. Prism they released what Preston openly called an untested patch, and so I'm saying, hey, if you want to prevent the loss of finality again, here's a patch. I need you to know that it's untested. And the responses, excuse me, the responses that I got immediately were, I'm not trying an untested patch. I don't want to get slashed. And I see this slightly differently. I don't see that kind of patch as being related to a slashable offense. Is that fair?
Yes, the validators have very robust slashing protection built in. So use it if you're not, if you've turned it off. I mean, it's all turned on by default in all of them, and so there would have to be an egregious bug for that to fail. messing around with attestation processing is not is in a completely different area of the client and will not get you slashed. So you know, even if you were to make two conflicting attestations, the slashing protection built in will stop you from doing that. I mean, even if the client tried to do it, the safety net is there, and it will stop you from doing that. So
you won't commit an offense against your own running client, and that's why it
correct.
takes two running clients. Okay.
Yeah, so because the validator knows what it has attested to in the past, it keeps a record of it. So unless you wipe that database or that record, and at the same time as something crazy is going on the network, then you know it will, before it makes any attestation, it will consult its record of what it's attested to in the past, and if it's slashable, it just won't do it. And that's very robust, very well tested. And so making changes elsewhere in the client it's the safety net, right? It's not going to lead to getting slashed. Might have other weird effects. It's tricky as a kind of, you know, product people. This balance between getting something out quickly and not making the situation worse is tricky. If you remember the Madasha testnet craziness that we went through,
for weeks.
And you know, at that time it wasn't help. You know, Prism made a release to fix the stuff, and that release was broken, and it just made everything worse because people didn't know what they're supposed to be running, and it was just even more chaotic. And it's tricky because you want to get people up and running again, but you have to do it right. And so the team spent a lot of time reviewing. You know, we had a war room going, reviewing the code all together, testing on our own nodes, for soak testing it for as long as we had time, 12 hours or so, and everything before making the release. But all the time under, you know, potentially under the gun of it all happening again. So it's tricky.
Was Madasha 2020? Is that, or maybe
it must have been like April 2020. It was 6 months or so before the beaconchain launch. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, the 3 years since then, maybe it's 3 years, I don't know. Like, the clients seem to have evolved like so much. Like, then they were fragile, rickety, like barely functioning, and now they seem so robust and well developed. At least to me, like playing with them every day, they seem. And again, I don't crack them open. I just play with them as is. And having been, you know, as a consumer playing with them, they seem to be so much more robust now than anything during Madasha.
Yeah, lots of practical lessons learned, right? I mean, you know, we get a lot of feedbacks from our users. We've encountered lots of different scenarios, especially test nets and so on, and we have very competent people building these things. And it's feedback loops are great in this ecosystem. Right? You get a lot of feedback on that, how things work, and that's the key really to building good quality, robust software. Yeah.
And that's the feedback I get so consistently is it's too hard to run these clients. And I'm thinking of like Coincash use guides. I can copy about 5 lines and paste them, and I'm running a client. We get to this place where like we've done it 1,000 times and it seems simple, but to new people it still seems like the most challenging thing ever. And also asking them to put you know $64,000 on the line. I could see why people would feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, we've talked previously about distributed validator technology. I mean, I think I think I'm with you that running a client yourself isn't as hard as people think it is, but I understand there's this sort of barrier, especially command line stuff. And the, you know, the value of the ETH. Distributed validator stuff takes away a lot of the concern, in the sense that you don't have to feel you're up 100% of the time. You know, you haven't got that panic. The others will carry you when you're down, and potentially you can have an operation where you've got, you know, 4 participants with a quarter of the stake each, and that allows you to participate in a robust way. So yeah, what I like to say is that what we've done with Ethereum is we've built a reliable system on top of unreliable infrastructure. And DVT takes that to the next level. You know, it goes down one level and building reliable validators on top of unreliable infrastructure, and you know, run by unreliable people who perhaps don't always know 100% what they're doing, and this is fine. You know, it will you know carry you through on that. So over time, it will get better. Yeah.
My personal intention is to run as many, or is to be a participant in as many DVT setups as I can, just because it does, like, I know how to run a node, and I'm happy to do that with 3 other people who aren't sure, because it provides that layer of additional security and robustness. So.
Yeah, and I think if we ever want to get to the appliance where that you just plug in and it works, you know, the thing my mum could run, you know, this then it will rely on something like distributed validator technology. You know, that is not going to be a standalone validating on its own account appliance. It will be something that is hooked up with a mesh of others.
I don't want to steer too far away, because I feel like we need to wrap up the whatever it is we were talking about, the finality issue. EtherFi is they're a staking company, but one of their promotions is linking up with DAppNode and Obol to send DVT nodes into remote locations. And so they're staking their own funds, but they are paying the people who are operating these nodes with rewards. So like you get a half of the reward from staking, 96 Ether. And the model just seems so futuristic to me. Like, I don't know if it will work, but it's so awesome to see this culmination of really neat technologies that are maybe pushing decentralization further.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is a nice segue to the diversity conversation. Diversity in all things, right? I mean, the data center, geographic location, hardware, and client software.
Yeah, we have focused for a long time on this, the target of client diversity, and clientdiversity.org shows a lot of our progress, and we're really doing well. There's obviously more progress to make, but I'm ready to zoom out and focus more on decentralization, with diversity being one component of that. Because what I'm afraid is going to happen to the community in a year or two is they're going to celebrate so much client diversity while being blind to real decentralization issues. And so we could have a network run by one operator, and that operator uses 4 different clients, and it's a very diverse client diverse network that is fully centralized. And so that's my current hang up.
Yeah, Vitalik has a nice article, a few years old now, which distinguishes 3 kinds of decentralization: logical, architectural, and political, if I recall correctly. Ethereum is logically centralized. It has to be. Everyone must get the same answer out as you expect. The balance of my account is the same, whoever looks at it. So that's logical centralization. Architecturally, it is decentralizable. It's, of course, the forces of centralization are there, but architecturally, we can distribute nodes globally, and that's very important. Guiding light for devs is, as we build the protocol, we maintain the ability for anyone, anywhere, practically to run a node. The hardware demands are low. And then there's a political side, which is who has control over the spec, the decisions that are made on the network, who gets kicked off the network or whatever. And this is what you're talking about here, Fizz, which is, if one operator runs, 80% of the nodes, then that's politically centralized. They can decide the fate of the network. They can censor transactions arbitrarily, control the fork choice, whatever they like. So yeah, absolutely, 100%.
my fear of that is it feels so comfortable and natural. Like efficiency is so high. These, the operators running those nodes they're super professional, and they get it right all the time. So we don't have anything to worry about.
Yeah, you'd think
All the
so,
while,
yeah.
like, yeah, I'm pushing for, like, let's get DVT nodes in rural huts in the middle of Central America or somewhere, and like that's my dream of political decentralization. Anyway, I'm rambling. One kind of closing question regarding to the finality issue. What advice do you have for operators, be they industrial operators or home operators? What can they do to contribute to? I fully expect it to happen again in an hour. Well, I won't be surprised. What can home users, operators do to support the network if that happens?
Yeah, it's a good question. There will be instance in future, different instance likely, but it's going to happen again. Keep alert. Know how your node is doing. Have some kind of alert set on so that you know when there's trouble. Beaconchain app is terrific, and we'll tell you when your node's not attesting. So the point of that is that you can become aware when there's a fix or a patch that needs applying quickly. So teams will scramble if they're able to fix something, that will scramble to get out an update, and it will be important to install that, or they will publish a workaround, and it'd be important to configure that. So know how your node's doing. Keep across the communication channels. It's difficult. One of the hard things about the decentralized community is that communication is scattered everywhere. And so I was on Telegram channels, Discord channels, and Reddit and Twitter and everything, just kind of firefighting people asking, "Oh, my node's gone down, my node's gone down." Go to your client's Discord channel. That should be the number one place. I didn't do very well managing this. In all the panic yesterday, but that should be the place where you share and receive information. It just makes the team's job so much easier. Raising issues on GitHub and stuff is just more noise at that point, because everyone is kind of heads down actually trying to fix this thing, and communicate as best they can. So keep it simple for your client teams. Just go to one place, let them deal with one communication channel. Don't DM them on Twitter. Don't DM them on Discord constantly, Telegram channels, whatever. Just focus that. And the other thing I'd say is we enjoy kind of marginally provisioning our node. Look, I'm running this node on this tiny piece of hardware, and 99% of the time it'll be fine. But when the network hits a bit of trouble, your node's going to struggle, and there's going to be nothing you can do about it until the network comes back. Sometimes you just need to have some spare capacity, some extra memory available, some extra CPU horsepower available to push through times of turbulence. So, don't have your node running at 80% memory capacity and 70% CPU constantly. Give it some breathing space so that when trouble does hit, then it is able to power through. That's what I would suggest. So when you're upgrading a node, don't be a cheapskate. And I need to upgrade my node. I need to bear that in mind.
We learned that during Madasha. So people who were around during Madasha knew that if you had spare spec, you were able to grind through, and if you didn't, then you fell off pretty quickly. And I'm the opposite. I love that the beacon chain is power efficient, energy efficient, but I also over spec my hardware just because, I love to see that 10% use.
Yeah, it's definitely a judgment call. And spending too much is also a mistake, because a few hours of downtime is not, is really not going to affect your income hugely. So, as a balance, there's no point spending, another like $5,000 on top of the range kit if your kind of risk is a few $100s. So, you got to pitch it right, but give it some headroom.
I think that's as Fizz, I think that's where I have some difference with many people are doing this as an investment, where I literally do this as a hobby. So I'm not as interested in like, am I profiting? I'm more interested in how fun is this. So that's something I might need to work on.
Fair enough.
Ben, I love talking to you. I appreciate your insights. I hope that our chat informs a lot of people about just the general overview of this loss of finality. And it gives people some sense of peace and calm. Like it's not that huge of a deal. It's something that's going to be resolved, and no, the chain didn't halt, and it's just a growing pain. So, hey, speaking of which, I had a question I wanted to ask about. Is this related to, we spent probably 5 or 6 weeks at a constant validator level with exits and entries being the same, and then we went to this straight up line of validator growth. Would that quick growth contribute to more network chatter that would cause something that wasn't visible before to be visible now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not directly related to processing the onboarding of the validators, but the question is, why have we not seen this before, right? I mean, old attestations have been around forever. Why did it trigger on these occasions, the last couple of days, this kind of death spiral, and it never did before? And the thinking is that at some point the network just gets so big that clients were handling it before, but now the network is so large, the state is so big that it is falling out of cash, or the sheer number of attestations that clients have to deal with just went over a tipping point. And one of the sort of lessons learned is we've slightly neglected our test nets. The Prata is supposed to be our test net, but it's much smaller than mainnet now. And so we're spinning up, lesson learned for the devs is we're spinning up some sort of attack nets, privately, which are much, much bigger, where we can stress test some of these scenarios with more realistic validator numbers. We've let mainnet get kind of run ahead of us in a way in that.
It has grown so fast.
Yeah, and we started with 20,000 or 25,000 validators back 2.5 years ago, and we've grown to like 25 times that big, pretty much, which is hard without massively increasing. I mean, we increased the size of the network by 25 times, but validator clients are not 25 times bigger. They don't use 25 times more CPU or memory or bandwidth, right? So that's involved a lot of engineering efforts to do that, but we're always making trade-offs, and sometimes those trade-offs don't keep up with the state of the growing network.
I really feel like we ought to find an excuse to chat more often. Maybe we'll have more finality issues, and we can hop on and chat about them. I always enjoy.
We don't have to talk about the bad things all the time, my friend. Let's talk about some good things.
You're right. We should do that. I'm going to end the recording. Ben, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and I really hope, I know that it will benefit the community. So thanks again.
Total pleasure as ever, Fizz. Thank you for the invitation.